Okay, so I want to discuss a bit some of the repercussions of Brexit. It's going to be a slightly longer video, so you'll excuse me if I pour a glass of Spanish vino. Two reasons for this. It's a Spanish general election, and I've got this quirky little way of doing something associated with politics when it's going on. So, Spanish election, Spanish wine. I also have Dutch cheese over there, so let's call this the goodbye to the EU. I'm in a sort of sentimental mood. Anyway, I want to talk about Scotland and Wales and the repercussions of Brexit on their respective independence movements. Now, the threat from the Scottish National Party has been going on for a few days, but the Anne Wood of Plaid Cymru, which is the Welsh Nationalist Party, has just announced that she too wants to push for a Welsh independence referendum. Now, without downplaying the historic role of Welsh nationalism, which has been a real phenomenon, Um, it has been a lot more muted in recent years than Scottish nationalism. I think that's fair to say. Wales hasn't had any recent independence referendum. Um, there is a few important things to point out. I'm going to throw a few statistics out here, and the sources from the Times and Wikipedia. Wikipedia gathers its information from other sources. Um, Scotland's independence referendum in 2014. The results were as follows: 2,002,000 people voted to remain in the United Kingdom. 1,618,000 voted for an independent Scotland. So that was a comfortable lead for Better Together. And that's not to say that Scotland wasn't divided. There were a lot of Scots who wanted independence, but the majority clearly voted to stay in the United Kingdom. Now, the statistics for this EU referendum were 1,661,191 to be precise. Scots voted to remain in the European Union. 1,018,322 Scots voted to leave. So that was a clear, solid lead for the Remain side, and that was every seat in Scotland. There was no exceptions. Every seat voted to remain in the EU. The turnout was 67%. Now, the turnout for the Scottish independence referendum was a bit higher. Unless I'm mistaken, in some seats it was as high as 78%. I may be getting that mixed up with last year's general election, but the point is, the Scottish independence referendum did have very, very high turnout. So I don't think you could say that's a misleading picture of what the situation was in Scotland. Clearly, in 2014, a majority of Scots voted to stay in the United Kingdom. Clearly, in 2016, a majority of Scots have voted to remain in the EU. But it goes without saying that 1,660, what was it, 661,000 is significantly less than 2,002,000. In fact, it's about 340,000 less. To put that into context, that's roughly the size of the city of Leicester or the city of Cardiff. Um, the reason I'm making a comparison between the two is because Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP are using this vote as some sort of mandate to push for a Scottish independence referendum. But if they were really so concerned about democratic will, they're disregarding basically the 2,002,000 Scottish votes against independence 2 years ago. Now, I accept that there are people who have changed their minds since then. I accept there are people who voted for Better Together who are now pro independence. But I think it's far too soon to be gambling Scottish civic society, frankly, just 2 years after the last vote, especially since both Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon at that time said it was a once in a lifetime event. Um, if you're going to take direct democracy to its extreme, then you would basically have consultation to the people on absolutely everything. And I take this to be absolute opportunism from the SNP. What they're basically doing is saying, oh, well, some people have changed their mind, therefore, we're going to have this independence referendum. And this argument about, well, most Scots voted for Remain, yet the UK is leaving the EU, there's a few important things to point out. Firstly, this EU referendum as important as it is, and I'm not downplaying that, it still has to go through the Westminster Parliament. Now, the majority of Westminster MPs are actually on the same side as Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP, i.e., they were on the Remain side of the argument. I believe something like two-thirds. David Lammy, I should say, I think that's how his name's pronounced, veteran London MP, he is actually pushing for this to be blocked. Um, that will, of course, be controversial. But the point is, there's clearly strong political opposition from all sides, from every party except for UKIP, um, against the UK leaving the EU. This has to go through Parliament. The point about the referendum is it's meant to be a referral by the people to the Parliament, and we entrust our democratically elected leaders to make a decision. The, and the fact is, there has been a lot of people regretting their leave vote. That's irrefutable. There are people who hate the EU and who have cast iron conviction on that, and I respect them. But I'm just talking about the facts here. So there's still a 2 year process to go through. I don't know what sort of position the EU is going to take. There's going to be frantic meetings going on this week. David Cameron's obviously going to Brussels. It could well be that, depending what happens on the political scene here, this is not absolutely set in stone. Although that petition has subsequently been seen to be a bit of a fraud. I don't know what the guy who started that, what his sort of thinking was. Apparently, he's an English Democrat who was for Leave, and he somehow had a logic that he didn't think the Leave side would win. And I can't really ponder what his excuse has been. I bet he regrets ever starting it since it's got almost 3 million, you know, people have signed it. Um, it has been pointed out that there have been other referendums across the European Union that have been put to the people. The people have voted a certain way, and then another referendum was held at a later date and they changed their mind. Um, some examples are, for example, the Maastricht Treaty was put to the Danish people, forget which year. They voted, I believe, against it. They later ratified it, and there's been numerous examples. This is much, much bigger than any of those examples, though, because this is the first time an entire country, especially a big country, has voted to leave. Um, yeah, I think it would be wrong to patronise the majority of British people and say, oh, they were just silly children and they made the wrong decision. You have to listen to democratic will. But if we do get into a recession and, if everything that the Remain side have speculated on turns out to be true, then it's no longer a case of scaremongering. It is actually, it's predicted to be accurate. And if that is the case, if the recession is really, really bad, we may have to take emergency measures to get back into the European Union. I don't know. It's far too early to say. It's only been 4 days. And I don't want to be a pessimist. I want to be as open minded as possible. But I will be honest, my gravest concern about all of this is the potential breakup of the United Kingdom. Now, I'm much less concerned about Wales and Scotland. In Wales, unlike Scotland, the majority of people voted for leave. I believe it was, I have the statistics here, bear with me a second. I actually took a picture of it because I can't look at any page whilst I've got this video open. In Wales, it was 855,000 for leave, 772,000 for remain. So, at least in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon can say she is going along with what people are saying. In Wales, Leanne Wood is just, she's living in her own fantasy land because the people of Wales have clearly said that they want to leave. So I see her statement as complete opportunism. She's looking at what's happening in Scotland. She gets on very well with Nicola Sturgeon. They have a joint goal of breaking up the United Kingdom. So it's pure opportunism, and that's all it is. But there's some logical issues here that go beyond the romantic notions that the SNP has of an independent Scotland. They're very practical issues. It's a simple fact that the European Union, even if Scotland gets independence, let's say they have a referendum even this year or early next year, and let's say the majority of Scots on this occasion decide that they want to leave the UK. It's going to take time before Scotland, to go through all the constitutional process for it to be a fully independent country. And even when that happens, This idea that they'll simply be let into the EU, I think, is hugely misguided. I can't think of a single example of a newly formed country that was simply let into the EU. And I know the Scots Nationalists say, well, Scotland's already a nation. But the point is, it is a constituent nation of a larger country. Now, I can't think of a single example where a newly independent country has been let into the EU automatically. I can't think of a single example. Every country that has joined the EU has had a waiting process, including the UK. The UK had to wait years. I believe in the 1950s there was drives for us to try and get into the European Union. Charles de Gaulle blocked it. Turkey, needless to say, has had to wait for decades. Um, Bosnia is currently in the process of joining. Um, but the point is, this idea that Scotland's just going to be let in, Eastern countries such as Bosnia would rightly say, wait a second, why are they jumping the queue? And that would build resentment within the bloc. Um, Within Spain, Catalonia obviously has a very similar aim to Scotland. They want independence from Spain. Although the British and Spanish governments are currently in a dispute over Gibraltar, I honestly think that we are in an exceptional time and situation. And personally, if it's a choice of preserving the United Kingdom or clinging on to an overseas territory, I think we need to look at the bigger picture. And if that means joint sovereignty, that is a difficult choice we may have to make. The reason I'm saying that is because the Spanish government, although they are a lot less keen on referendums, and the Spanish government's made it clear they're not going to put a referendum on Catalonia, um, I think the Spanish and British governments would have shared interests. And it was Mariano Rajoy who has just said that, he said a few years ago that Scotland couldn't just enter. That caused controversy at a time and a rift with the devolved government in Scotland. Um, but I don't think his prophecy, I don't think his statement on that was entirely inaccurate because there's a precedent to this. Every country that has joined the European Union has had to wait to do so. So I don't know what Nicola Sturgeon thinks is going to happen. She has conceded that it won't be an easy process, but in conceding that, she's basically, you know, leaving the Scottish people to a wilderness. If it's complicated right now, it's going to be even more complicated for the Scottish people. We have left the European Union, or we have decided as a nation to leave the European Union. Now, what Nicola Sturgeon is basically proposing is to isolate the Scottish people even further, because she can't guarantee that Scotland's going to enter the EU. So it's a huge gamble. Just as Scottish independence would be a huge gamble. And in my opinion, the Leave campaign was a big gamble. We do not need yet another gamble. Um, and I think I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't know if the Scottish people, although many Scots sort of see another independence referendum as inevitable, I don't think they've got the appetite for it. I might be wrong about that, but they will have had three referendums in less than 3 years, if that's the case. Um, and I just don't think they'll have the appetite for it. I hope they don't. Then, of course, is the issue of Northern Ireland. One person who's been watching my videos, Nimage, excuse me, I forget your name, but you've been asking me about Northern Ireland. I am originally from Northern Ireland, but I've grown up in England now. To be quite honest, I don't follow Northern Irish politics that closely, so I'm not in the best position to talk about exactly what is going on there. As I understand it, Sinn Féin has called for a referendum on a united Ireland. I believe it is more likely that there will be a united Ireland, certainly before Wales breaks away, and possibly before Scotland breaks away. Um, if that is the democratic will of people in Northern Ireland, it would be very difficult for me as someone who believes in democracy to say I'd be against that. But it will leave me personally feeling very strange. I regard myself as British. I don't call myself Irish, I call myself British. I hold a British passport. Now, if Northern Ireland becomes part of a united Ireland again, I honestly feel like I'll be in a bit of a wilderness. At present, as I understand it, I can apply for Irish citizenship, and there has been occasion I pondered on that idea, and I won't rule it out in the future. Personally, I will say this: I think it would be an utter tragedy if the United Kingdom falls apart. I love this country, and I make no apology for saying that. and I think it would be an utter tragedy if we fragment ourselves. England alone is not going to be able to compete with France or Germany. I don't know exactly what the English GDP is on its own, but it certainly wouldn't be on the scale of France. Now, at the moment, the UK, well, at least pre Brexit, the UK was broadly similar to France. We were the fifth largest economy in the world. If we fragment, I'm not an economist, but I would speculate England will be down to about 20th. Now, call it vanity, call it nationalism, whatever. I don't want to see a situation where we are weakened in the world stage. Call it vanity, call it nationalism, but I don't want to see it. You know, I have a certain degree of pride in my country, and I don't want to see us weakened in the world stage. And you know what? That's not such a. It's really not an extreme position to have. It's quite. I mean, very few people want to see their country weakened. It's common sense. So it goes without saying that if Nicola Sturgeon really pushes for the second independence referendum, personally, I take it as opportunism, and I think it's rather despicable. I see it as A, the SNP holding the United Kingdom to ransom, B, opportunism, kicking the UK when it's down, basically, and also inconsistent because they vowed on air that that referendum in 2014 would be a once in a lifetime event. I actually believe that there should be a certain approach by the British government, and this will be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. I believe the British government should simply refuse another referendum. The fact is this: the British government in 2014 let the Scottish people decide. No one else in the United Kingdom could decide that. No English person, no Welsh person, no Northern Irish person. Now, for all the talk of the tyrannical Westminster, there's very, very few other governments in the world that would allow that situation. Can you see the Chinese doing it? Hell no. Can you see the Russians doing it? Definitely not. But even other democracies, can you see France doing it? No. Spain has said they're not going to give Catalonia a referendum. And I doubt that the federal government in Washington would humour the idea of Texas breaking away. So the idea of Westminster being tyrannical really wears thin when you consider that. Why should we, that 60 million people, be held ransom by, I was going to say 5 million Scots, but it isn't even like that because there's many Scots that will still want to, who will still want to stay in the UK. I don't see why one breakaway party should hold an entire country to ransom. That's what they're essentially doing. The SNP love to say, "Oh, Scotland's a nation and it should decide its own destiny." Well, as a matter of fact, the United Kingdom is a nation as well. The United Kingdom is a sovereign country. Now, the SNP agenda will break up this country. That's a simple fact. Why shouldn't the British government defend itself and say, wait a second, we're not going to let this happen? Why should we simply let the fate of an entire nation of 65 million people lie with one separatist party pushing its own agenda? I don't see why. And ultimately, this decision does lie with Westminster, and I think the British government should simply say, no, we gave you the choice 2 years ago. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity. The Scottish people decided then. That's it. Because frankly, people do change their mind in politics. Look at what's happened with Leave. There are Leave voters that are regretting their decision. There may be people in Scotland, and I don't want this to sound patronising, but it's just an observation, that are angry with Westminster for whatever reason. They think, oh, we'll vote for the SNP or we'll vote for independence, but they're not informed of all the issues, and they're not really considering everything. So I'm not actually a supporter of direct democracy all the time because I think it can lead to unrest and anarchy. And that's what we're seeing. It was a massive, massive gamble that David Cameron took with this. And if the entire United Kingdom breaks up, David Cameron, and I don't like to kick a man when he's down, but he might go down as another Lord North. Lord North, of course, was the Prime Minister who lost America. That could be David Cameron's legacy, the Prime Minister who lost the United Kingdom. And it wouldn't be his fault alone, of course, but these are very, very serious issues for anyone who cares about this country. These are very serious issues. And I don't, I take it as the SNP take an opportunism Um, the fact of the matter is, fewer Scots voted to remain in the EU than Scots who voted to remain in the United Kingdom. That's a simple fact. So the SNP's pretext for calling an independence referendum is actually going against the democratic trend of the Scottish people, if you look at it that way. It's late here, so I'm going to round this up. No doubt there will be future developments. I'll be speaking more at length about both the Conservative leadership contest and the Labour leadership contest. I believe that is coming. I believe Mr. Corbyn's job is really on the line. Um, and I'm sure there'll be many other things to talk about because this is the defining political event of my lifetime, basically. Thank you for watching.